When my wife and I got married, she was already a successful businesswoman who ran a company with her father. Her father and I grew close over time, and he even took me under his wing, showing me the ropes of the business world. Thanks to their success, my wife and I also became wealthy. However, after 6 years of marriage, my wife began distancing herself from me. As part of her job, she would visit clients to deliver products and discuss upgrades, and her charm and good looks certainly helped with business. My wife took her commitment to her job a bit too far when she began acting distant and overly enthusiastic about visiting a particular client. Concerned about her behavior, I confided in her father and shared my worries with him. To my surprise, he suggested that I follow her discreetly to the client's house. Although his suggestion seemed underhanded, I decided to take his advice. Little did I know that this decision would lead to the worst day of my life. I parked my car down the street from the client's house and watched as my wife went inside. The client's name was Doug, and our records indicated that he was unmarried. But would that stop him from taking advantage of a married woman? I highly doubted it. My mind raced with terrible possibilities, and unfortunately, my fears were soon to be confirmed. As I approached the front door, I hesitated to knock and instead opted for a sneakier approach. Slowly, I opened the door and peered inside, listening for any sounds. It didn't take long for me to hear faint noises emanating from the second floor. It was clear that this wasn't a typical business conversation. With my heart racing, I climbed up the stairs while recording everything on my phone. As I approached a particular door, the sounds coming from inside grew louder and more intense. It was clear what was happening behind the closed door. I mustered the courage to open it and found my worst nightmare unfolding before me. My wife was having sex with Doug. She immediately noticed me and started screaming as she tried to cover herself from the camera's view. But it was too late. Everything had already been recorded. She begged me to stop recording and let her get dressed, but I refused. I continued filming as I left Doug's house and got into my car. As I drove to my father-in-law's house, my sobs and angry words were captured on the recording. I had nowhere else to go, so I turned to him for help. He welcomed me with open arms and listened intently as I recounted what had happened. He watched the video, but stopped it once he heard the moaning. He believed my side of the story and assured me that he was on my side. 20 minutes later, my wife arrived at the house and walked straight into the kitchen where we were sitting at the dining table. Before she even had a chance to sit down, her father asked her how long she had been seeing Doug. I was taken aback by my father-in-law's sudden question, and my wife seemed just as surprised as I was. I had assumed that she had only cheated on me once, but her father had proof that suggested otherwise. He showed us her travel logs, which indicated that she had been visiting Doug's house far more frequently than was necessary for the past 11 months. I was stunned and looked at my wife with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. She tried to defend herself by claiming that it was just this one time and that it was for the benefit of the business. But her explanations didn't add up, and at one point, it sounded like she was trying to justify her actions. Her father was unsympathetic to her plight. When he informed her that she was fired, she let out a strange noise of shock and began to stutter. She desperately wanted to keep her job, but what could she possibly say or do? I had captured her on video having sex with Doug, and it was evident that this wasn't a one-time mistake. In addition to betraying me, her father explained that this was not the behavior he expected from his business partner or daughter. The real blow that made my wife plead for forgiveness was when he declared that he was going to disown her. Regardless of how much she begged or what she said, her father had made up his mind. She was unable to reside in her matrimonial residence, as it was registered under her father's name, and he refused to allow her to stay there. Furthermore, she couldn't seek refuge at her partner's place either. This left her with no choice but to live in her Audi. which, although it was a nice car, was not a suitable place to call home. On one occasion, when she phoned her father in tears, he informed her that she had 11 months, the duration of her extramarital affair, to reconsider her actions and stop them. He expressed his disgust towards her and concluded by saying that he was fortunate to have found out the truth and escaped from her, giving him a choice. I had two options: either move into the marital home and claim it as my own, or move in with him. He possessed a massive mansion that was equivalent to the size of two houses combined, with a long hallway linking the two sections. I was certain that I would have ample privacy in his abode, but what I really needed was his emotional support, as I regarded him as family. Therefore, I decided to reside in the marital home for the time being, but promised to visit his place frequently. Moreover, he even proposed a partnership in the family business, which was a generous offer. I happily agreed when he offered me a job 7 years ago, and I have been working with him since. During this time, I was fortunate enough to meet an incredible woman who is now my wife, and we have been blessed with 2 children. Life couldn't be any better. On the other hand, my ex's attitude towards life appears to be bleak, evident from her cynical Facebook posts and the infrequent spiteful messages she sends me. However, I don't let it affect me, and instead, I share them with my wife, and we have a good laugh about it. Although she may still have some money, what she lacks is the love and care that I had provided her with. My reaction to this is, wow, this is one crazy story. It appears to me that your ex began to believe that she had everything and wanted more. She likely felt entitled to more attention and thought that there was no better way or time to receive it than through her client. However, this turned out to be a foolish and self-centered decision that ultimately cost her the most valuable relationships in her life and her career. I noticed the change in her behavior immediately and sought advice from my father-in-law. In my opinion, he displayed a great deal of wisdom throughout this stressful ordeal, while his ex was left with nothing and no one to care for her. This serves as a valuable lesson to keep one's ego in check and never assume that deceitful tactics are a good idea. It's heartening to hear that he has started a new family and formed a close bond with his adoptive father. Thank you for sharing your experience and the positive outcome. I wish you all the best in life. Moving on to the second story for today. My wife, 35, and I, 38, have 2 sons. At the story 2 time this story begins, Eddie is already 11 years old, and his younger brother Teddy is 7. On an apparently ordinary morning, my wife hurried off to work early while I prepared breakfast for our boys. We had a delightful and lighthearted conversation, as we typically do before school. The car ride to school was a bit quiet, and it appeared that Eddie had something on his mind. Despite my attempts to inquire, he insisted that everything was fine. After work, I picked them up from school at my wife's request. Later that day, my wife sent me a text message informing me that she had to stay late at work for a meeting. Although I disliked it when this occurred, I had grown accustomed to it over the past decade. Upon arriving home, I began cooking dinner for my sons while they sat at the table doing their homework. Eddie still appeared preoccupied, but he diligently completed his assignments and inquired about them. We enjoyed a family dinner together, during which they shared stories about their day at school. On that particular evening, everything appeared to be ordinary, but little did I know that it was to be the last time we would have a heart-to-heart conversation and dinner together before receiving life-altering news. As we were finishing up our meal, Eddie's voice trembled as he confessed that he had something important to disclose. Teddy, looking uneasy, questioned whether it was a good idea for Eddie to reveal it. I assured them both that they could tell me anything. Then, Eddie revealed that Mommy had informed them that I was not their biological father, and that several times each month she would take them to visit their real dad. I was shocked beyond words. I inquired about the identity of their biological father, hoping that I knew him. To my surprise, my nephew Kevin was the answer. I was stunned, unable to move or react for a brief moment. My sons sensed my distress and asked me if I was upset or angry, and what I intended to do. As soon as I regained my composure, I reassured them of my love and affirmed that I would always consider myself their father. They were content with my response and joined me in clearing the table after dinner. While they went to play, I pondered my next move. The fact that my own brother had fathered my children was difficult to accept, and I had no way to validate the truth. I instructed the boys to wait until a specific date to disclose to their mother that they had informed me that I was not their biological father. They agreed, but soon forgot about it. I lounged on the couch while watching the boys play, waiting for my wife to return home. Upon her arrival, I feigned illness and promptly retired to bed. While pretending to be asleep, I waited for my wife to put the boys to bed before attempting to access her phone. Though I was anxious about checking her phone for the first time, I forged ahead, constantly worried that she would awaken. While perusing my wife's phone, I discovered a discreet messaging application cleverly hidden within a folder named Utilities. It appeared as though she was attempting to conceal its presence from others. As I sifted through her messages, I stumbled upon a conversation between her and Kevin that read like a typical exchange between romantic partners discussing their day, arranging future meetings, and sharing updates about the boys. However, intermixed within these innocuous messages were more unsettling ones that contained declarations of love, references to Kevin as her husband, and affirmations that the children were fortunate to have him as their real father. She even mentioned her intentions to marry him when the timing was right. As I continued to read the messages, I was confronted with explicit sexual content between my wife and brother. I was stunned to discover that whenever they wanted to engage in sexual activity, my wife would deceive me by claiming that she had to work late. The evidence I had been seeking was right in front of me on her phone. I felt like a fool for believing in the perfect and honorable facade that my wife and family had presented. I swiftly took screenshots of their conversation and forwarded them to myself. Revenge was the only recourse, and it had to be satisfyingly sweet. The following day, I hired a private investigator and a lawyer to ensure that I had undeniable proof to back my claims. Upon consulting with my lawyer, I discovered that I had the legal right to claim alimony from my former spouse, retain ownership of our home, and sue my brother for engaging in an affair with my wife and causing our marriage to dissolve. In a swift manner, a DNA test was conducted on my sons, revealing that their genetic makeup was not a complete match to mine. Instead, it was more likely that my brother's DNA would produce a more accurate match. Over the next month, I had a private investigator tail my wife, which made it difficult for me to feign normalcy. I continued to conceal my knowledge of the secret revealed by my son. At the end of the investigation, the private investigator provided me with a collection of evidence, which included 42 photographs of my wife, children, and brother. The photographs taken by the private investigator depicted my wife, children, and brother interacting as a family at various locations, including the park, his house, and restaurants. Witnessing these images was a heart-wrenching experience, and it was disturbing to see them all behaving as if everything was normal. Additionally, there were pictures of my wife and brother taken through his bedroom window, which indicated the degree of intimacy between them. The private investigator had clearly gone to great lengths to obtain such explicit evidence, even climbing a tree to take the photographs. Having obtained all the evidence required, it was time for my son to reveal to his mother and Uncle Kevin that I was now aware of their relationship. I reminded him to do so during their next visit. 4 days later, my wife took the children under the guise of visiting her mother. I always had a strong dislike for my mother-in-law, but the feeling was mutual as she never seemed to like me either. I doubt she would ever come to terms with the fact that her daughter had children with her husband's brother and passed them off as his own. The trio left and returned within 30 minutes, probably after being tipped off by Eddie about me knowing the truth. But it was too late. I had already changed the locks and left a note on the door informing them that it was time for them to move in with Kevin. Divorce papers and court summons will be delivered to Kevin's address for both my wife and me. My spouse knocked on the door and wept, which troubled me deeply. She had preferred my brother over me, engaging in a long-term clandestine affair with him and bearing his children. She had even instructed our sons to keep it a secret from me, despite her prolonged weeping by the front door. I had no interest in confronting her at that moment. Finally, Kevin arrived to take them all away. They resided with him during the divorce proceedings and court hearings. I retained possession of my house and made alimony payments to my wife. Although I was not required to pay child support, I did emerge victorious in court against my brother, who was ordered to pay me a substantial amount for his role in sleeping with my wife and causing the breakdown of our marriage. Once I became a wealthy bachelor, my ex-wife's relationship with Kevin began to crumble, perhaps due to the strain of living with their sons around the clock. Additionally, the stress of the court proceedings and the financial loss likely contributed to their relationship's demise. After only a year, my ex-wife left Kevin's house and lived with her mother for that year and beyond. Even after, she would text me daily to check on me or apologize. I was able to visit with our sons, which they appreciated, but it was not the same as our previous relationship. My ex could see the change and rightly blamed herself for it. It has been 2 years since these events, and the boys harbor resentment towards their mother for altering their relationship with their father. Despite her overwhelming guilt, my ex-wife has no choice but to continue raising our children at her mother's house and has yet to re-enter the dating scene. My brother and I no longer speak, but my father has informed me that he regrets his actions. On a more positive note, I have started dating a wonderful woman whom I have a strong connection with. She has 1 daughter and hopes to have more children in the future. She is caring, kind, and honest. Even if we do not end up getting married, I am hopeful for a bright future. Thank you for your sympathy regarding my wife's actions. It is not a common occurrence, but my wife made a deliberate decision to have children with my brother behind my back early in our marriage. I am fortunate to have my father to confide in, but I also made wise decisions on my own by taking the time to consider my options carefully. The steps I took allowed me to end the relationship as cleanly as possible. I am grateful that my wife did not attempt to frame me for anything or conspire to harm me, as such situations unfortunately do occur in today's world.